Ahmed Hassan has been convicted of attempted murder after he left a bomb on a busy underground train in Parsons Green. And staying with this, British authorities are facing questions after it was revealed Ahmed Hassan, an Iraqi asylum seeker, was referred to the government's de-radicalisation programme PREVENT before carrying out the attack. So what does the case tell us about the security of Britain's borders? I'm joined now by Alex Scrivener, Policy Manager at Global Justice Now, and Douglas Murray, author of The Strange Death of Europe, Immigration, Identity, Islam. Hello to you both. Alex Scrivener, to you first. This was a young man who arrived. He said that he'd been trained by ISIS. What level of checks will he have gone through before he was then placed with a foster family and determined to be safe to be in the country?
Well, I mean, the first very important thing to remember is we mustn't use this tragic incident as a reason to conflate what are two very different issues. The issue of fighting against terror and the issue of asylum policy, because what we've got to remember, the vast majority of terrorists and terror suspects in this country are homegrown British citizens and not asylum seekers. So to suggest in some way that this is a problem with asylum, it's actually not. The vast majority of terrorists in this country are of British nationals. And we've got to remember also not to make generalisations on that. So, for example, when in 2016, the very tragic death of Jo Cox occurred and she was killed by a white male, we didn't have debates on TV about whether there were problems with white males in the UK. So I think we must be very careful to separate those two issues. Now, having said that, we have a very strict asylum policy in the UK. This person, along with everyone else, would have been subjected to a very strict procedure. Obviously, no matter how strict it is, there are always people in any process who manage to get through. And in fact, the problem with the UK's asylum system is not that it's too lax, not that it lets too many would-be terrorists through, but the fact that it's completely inhumane. We have terrible examples in the UK asylum system of people being asked to do really quite barbaric things. For example, there's a case where a gay asylum seeker was asked to produce video evidence and photo evidence of their sexual orientation. Now, we have a system in this country which actually is overly onerous on some of these people who, the vast majority of them, are genuinely fleeing persecution, war and terrible conditions, and they don't deserve to be treated that way. So with this one case, this is a very tragic incident, and it's absolutely terrible that this one person managed to get through the system. But the reality is that the terror problem in this country is caused mostly by British citizens.
It only takes one, though, doesn't it, Alex Scrivener?
Oh, indeed it does, and there are many of those people in this country who were born and grew up in this country. I mean, 73%, I believe, the statistic is, of terror attacks in the UK over the last year or so were committed by UK nationals. So, asylum seekers are not the problem here. The problem is the culture of terror, and we need to fight this horrible ideology. Okay, and the way to do it is not by victimising poor and vulnerable people.
Let's bring in Douglas Murray on this. Asylum seekers not the problem here.
I don't think anyone but a madman would claim that everyone who claims asylum is a terrorist or going to be a terrorist. However, your other guest is just flat out wrong that this is a one-off case. Just take the last year. The young man Salman Abedi, whose parents came to this country as asylum seekers from Libya in the 90s, he was the child of asylum seekers who fled Gaddafi's regime in Libya. He was the one who blew up 22 people on a Monday night at a rock concert in Manchester. Go a few weeks forward from there to the London Bridge attacks. One of the London Bridge attackers came to this country, falsely claimed to be a Libyan, actually was a Moroccan, gave a different name from the actual name he was, and also lied about his age, was found to be living under a lie, but just lived under his other identity anyway, went on to slash people's throats on London Bridge and Borough Market. Go forward a few months, you've got Ahmed Hassan, we're talking about at the moment, the young man who left the bomb at Parsons Green, and then just go forward just to last month, where Munir Mohammed was sent to prison for attempting. He was an illegal asylum seeker. He came to this country illegally on a lorry, got out at the M1, Just in January, he was convicted of trying to plant a bomb in a town in the north of England, and he went down last month. So it's flat out wrong to say that this is a one-off. And I also think that all the people who are trying to do that and trying to divert attention from this should just remember for a moment where this discussion would be if the horror that this young man was trying to perpetrate had happened. We would not be talking about dozens of people terrified and their hair singed. We would be talking about dozens more British parents having their children in body bags. So I really think that the people who are trying to pretend that this is not about a very serious problem, which we have to address on top of other problems, should really recognise the seriousness of this and stop playing political games.
OK, Douglas Murray, so how should we address this then?
Well, the first thing is that every counter-terrorism and counter-extremism programme has multiple tools in its box. There is no one tool for solving this. People are going to be talking about the PREVENT programme, doubtless, in relation to this. This young man should never have been in the UK. He should never have been in Britain. Just like Munir Mohammed, the Sudanese man who I mentioned, who was jailed last month. They should not have been in Britain. So it's all very well that we say, you know, how is it that we cannot de-radicalise people who have been trained by Al-Qaeda or ISIS or any other group? It's pretty hard to come up with a de-radicalisation programme so good that you can, among other things, also capture people who actually admitted to British authorities that they had been trained by ISIS. And this young man, he clearly had some level of training because he knew how to put together a plausible device.
Alex Scrivener, to you, this is a man who, yes, as we've heard, has admitted that he had been trained by ISIS. He told his college tutor that it was his duty to hate the West, and yet he slipped through the system.
Well, I mean, this is one very tragic case where someone did get through, but that's a very, very rare occurrence. I mean, what Douglas is saying is absolutely wrong. A recent Danish study showed that across the whole of Europe over the year and a half to April 2017, only 4 asylum seekers were involved in terror attacks throughout that period. You know, the vast majority of terror attacks are perpetrated by citizens of the UK.
Did you hear me dispute that?
Yeah, I did, and I heard you also.
Did you hear me dispute that?
I did, and I will answer you. Your own organisation, the Henry Jackson organisation, released a report last year according to which 2/3 of terror suspects, or terror arrests, actually, indeed.
Terror convictees, actually, I think you'll find.
Well,
It's convicted terrorists.
Two-thirds of them were either born or raised in the UK. And one of the examples you raised was of someone who came to the UK as a child. We can't tell which children are going to grow up to be terrorists. The fact is that these people were radicalised in the UK. The UK is where this problem is.
Let me reiterate the point I made, since you haven't bothered to pick it up. Let me reiterate the point because you haven't bothered to pick it up. Munir Mohammed last month. Clearly, therefore, the case we're talking about today was not a one-off. This is just a one-off this month. I gave you the example of the London Bridge attacker. The interesting example of Manchester of Salman Abedi, which I cited, is relevant because his parents came to the UK because they were fleeing the Gaddafi regime, because they were from the Libyan Islamic fighting group. We have to ask questions about a country. First of all, not irrelevant. First of all, and by the way, I'll decide what's relevant in what I say, thank you. First of all, because it seems very unwise to me that this country gives a residence or asylum to people who are from jihadist groups. Secondly, because as I gave you an example of the London Bridge attacker, of Munir Mohammed, the illegal Sudanese immigrant who was sent to prison last month, and of the case we're talking about today, these people should never have been in the UK. That is a quite separate issue from the very interesting and important one you also raised, and which my think tank has published the report on, showing the proportion of these attackers who are indeed UK citizens, which is another problem, and another problem we also need to address. But please don't try to divert from the one that we're on today.
Alex Scrivener, regardless of whether somebody was radicalised in the UK, whether they're from the UK or whether they've come to the UK, do we have a problem with our anti-radicalisation programmes like PREVENT?
Well, I tell you what, we have a very serious problem that we're having this debate about asylum when actually the real issue is anti-terrorism. And the fact people like Douglas are stoking essentially divisions within our society, making us suspicious of our Muslim neighbours, our Muslim friends, people in other countries, people who are asylum seekers. And that is what the terrorists want. People like Douglas are letting the terrorists win.
You're so on point. You're so on point. What they really want.
Douglas Murray, I'll bring you in a moment. Let's just let Alex Scrivener finish his point.
Yeah, we need, as a society, to come together to defeat terrorism, and that means accepting people. The vast majority of asylum seekers, the huge majority of asylum seekers, are here genuinely because they are fleeing terrible war, terrible suffering and terrible persecution. And these people should not be victims of that terror attack. They should not become secondary victims of these horrible bombings. We should not break the stick on these people.
Alex is from a fanatical group that believes in an open borders world, that believes we shouldn't have asylum systems, we shouldn't have migration restrictions in place, and so on. That is a very, very fringe view that Alex is representing. Most people in the UK, as in most other countries, actually believe we should have borders, we should have strict asylum systems, and much more. They don't believe, for instance, as Alex's organisation and many others do, that everybody who's in the Calais camp is some kind of Mother Teresa-like figure. They are worried about our asylum system, and they are right to be worried about it because, and again I come back to it, Alex and the fanatics from the open borders movement always ignore this. You have case after case, as well as the homegrown cases of people who should never have been in the UK who then carry out acts of terrorism. And as for this wild, extreme position that Alex and his colleagues take, that really what people do when they're planting a bomb on a Parsons Green tube, for instance, in the rush hour, just beside a group of school children going to school, that what actually the terrorist has in mind is to put some words into my mouth or other. No, frankly, there are groups like Alex's that want to, for very partisan political reasons, pretend that there are no problems from a mad, loose, open borders world. And they want to stop people like me who are pointing out that on top of us having a homegrown problem, which we do have, we also have a problem of an asylum system that allows somebody to break into our country, to tell the British authorities they have been trained by ISIS, and then leave a bomb on the underground. Sorry, Alex. People like me are never going to stop saying that because we're always going to continue to say the facts that are in front of us.
Alex?
Well, I mean, it's more divisive rhetoric, I'm afraid. I mean, all I can say is we don't have open borders. It's an absolute myth that we do. We have one of the strictest border regimes in the world.
Clearly not strict enough.
Last week, I mean, we are incredibly strict to this point of inhumanity. At the moment, at Yell's Wood Detention Centre, there are women on hunger strike because of the terrible conditions we put asylum seekers through in this country. So the idea we don't have controls is ridiculous. It's completely...
Well, I've given you several cases which you still haven't answered.
It's just not true. The facts don't match your rhetoric.
You still haven't answered the facts.
Okay.
The facts are, from your own organisation, the vast majority of terror incidents are by UK citizens. Asylum is not the issue here. The reality is that I can go anywhere in the world for a holiday if I want. I don't have to.
I'm happy for you, Alex. I'm really happy for you.
Someone fleeing war and persecution cannot come here because it's
I
not...
think the British school children should be going to school safely.
Gentlemen, we are out of time. Thank you both very much for your views. This is Sky.